Oh, and then what was that good, better, best? Is that like the three versions of the design?
So at Atlassian, I think we've tried to use this framework called good, better, best. Good, better, best is essentially ways of framing a design in terms of the best experience for the user, a better experience and like a good experience. So obviously you want to always be aiming for best as like a designer. But under certain constraints, sometimes there is a trade-off there. And so good, better, best is a framework that helps us communicate with people about the different approaches we're taking. But for example, here you can see 3 large umbrella approaches. So good, better, and the best version of the experience. And then even at a high level, like the best is the most probably simplified. And then within each approach, you have different ways that you could take it, right? So I'm saying good is you have to manually filter, better is maybe it's like pre-filtered and we offer things differently. It's just a different framing when it comes to exploring. I think it gives you more freedom to just scrap any assumptions, and then it gives you opportunity to push back if you find, okay, actually this user experience really warrants we talk about scope a bit more. We can push back against these things. And yeah, good, better, best is a framework that I find really useful. And so trying to include it as a key page, I think, within Atlassian.
Welcome to Deep Dive. I'm Jay, and today with me, I have the amazing Jade, who's going to give us a deep dive into Atlassian's Figma file. Jade, super stoked to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, this is super fun. I'm keen.
Oh my God. First of all, just looking at the screen resolution, I know you got probably a big monitor. What screen size monitor are you using?
I have a really huge one. I think it's like 32-inch from memory, but I just know that I do have a habit of screen sharing and it's tiny. So I just remind me to like zoom in anytime. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So in this Figma file here, I see that this is pretty much like you've got some files that are ready for dev. And
Yep.
the first question that comes to mind for me is, Jay, how do you do Dev Handoff?
Yeah, so I think the Dev Handoff really depends on how I work with the dev team and how embedded I am. So actually this file is pretty interesting because I worked with a couple of dev teams on it. So each page is structured according to the way I work with that team. Even at a high level without zooming into anything, this one screen is more top level. You can see there's not too much like annotations or documentation because with this dev team, I worked in like an embedded way. So I was like in their meetings, I was explaining these things. It was more like of a sync process, whereas I guess a more traditional handoff, quote unquote, could be something like the second page. In this page, I was working with another engineering team, and as well as documenting in Figma, I tried to do more like annotations because didn't get to spend as much time with the team itself. And so for this file in particular, or like this portion of the build, I tried to document more. Not all the documentation is in Figma. A lot of it exists also in like Confluence and Loom, which I've linked here.
So we've got some annotations going on there for the component spec.
Yep. So for this team as well, just trying to like clear things out in terms of defining language and layers. It's really clear just because there's less back and forth and there's less context that you can give the team up front when you're building with them. And so just trying to really build that into the file. And like with this component spec, I've also got it relating to the spec in Confluence as well, just to really define what each of these like nouns or things refer to and what they should map with.
How does a engineer understand, because you've got all this stuff like issue key, quick actors, owner, and all these things, right? So do they have another glossary or index where they can go and see what these things mean, or they already know?
So I think at a top level, for example, like working with Jira, things like issue key and summary are quite general sense, like they're quite general across Atlassian, but I do have definitions also spec'd out. So for example, this is the corresponding page with that Figma spec, and you can see the same spec here, and here I've got information, the exact definition that I also work with engineering on, and I also give some examples. And so this helps clarify what things are. And if it needs more clarification, we'll talk through comments or just quickly jump on a call or something.
I got a new question for you here. I haven't, to be very fair, used Confluence for Dev Handoff, when working with developers. So according to you, what is the information a designer should provide on this Confluence page for developers to quickly work on the designs? What are the stuff that you are providing here?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it really depends on the feature itself. So in the past, I've also done a full spec on Confluence. So this is like a 1-for-1, add one screen, and then on Confluence, you write the description, copy, things like that, where it's a big table. But for this feature in particular, we're building on an existing page. And so the main structure and behavior of the page is already set for this dev team, right? So they don't need context and they don't need me to repeat this and write it out again. So what I've really done, rather than focusing on like page, is just focus on this particular spec and component, because this is what's new and this is what they'll be building out. And so what I've done is somewhat similar, but on a more like micro lens. So rather than saying full screen, how it's defined, some examples and details about it, I would do that but on the spec level. So as you can see, like issue key here, I've separated out every annotation or every noun within the component. And then I basically define what it is, some examples, and then whether there's any other conditionals that need to get applied to that particular noun or like.
What happens if you don't have this definition table? What if you delete this entire table or you never even created that?
Yeah, so I think it's just a lot harder to work together. So it's not only how you like refer to the component. For example, if I'm like agent vertical name, someone could just say name of the thing. It's really hard to align on language internally if you don't know what you're all talking about. So you can still get work through. There'll just be like way more back and forth and probably potentially miscommunication about what we're talking about. Usually it's good to like anchor on a visual. So that's why I like obviously having things in Figma, everything's very visual, but you can also back that up with having very clear definitions of what each thing relates to. And so when you're talking about it, you're definitely talking about the same thing and you're on the same page.
I freaking love this.
Yeah. It's been super useful. I think in the past also I've definitely run into the problem of there's this big Slack thread and I'm talking with an engineer. And then halfway through I realize, oh wait, we're talking about like different things. And so that's just like trying to avoid that situation basically.
And also there's all these acronyms inside companies. Like, so if an engineer just joined your team recently, they may not even know what agent vertical name means.
Yeah, exactly. I think also a lot of information gets learned as you go. And so it's quite like localized to the team that you're in. And so when you do cross-functional things, it's just good to definitely like align on everything. Yeah. Obviously, I spend most of my time probably in Figma, and like devs will spend most of their time in their code editor, but we tend to like use things like Confluence and Loom as like centralized places. So we just really try and clarify cross-functionally.
So on this Confluence page, you've got the definitions. And if you scroll up, you've got the Figma file embedded. And then what else you've got on this page for developers to review?
Yeah, so basically it's the definitions, it just keeps going. But as you can see, like for example here, the definitions I'm trying to put in their language. Like this is like a matter of speaking each other's languages, right? They can jump in Figma and see all of my flows correctly, but in terms of defining it, I try and do it in, I guess, the engineering worldview. And so that way you get that common understanding. This page specifically was made for definitions, and so that's the bulk of this page here, but I've definitely got other pages, which is like how you make decisions and things like that.
Oh, wow. One thing I caught on there is in that definitions, you had some job statuses of different colors, like this treatment and stuff. So a lot of times when I work with developers, they'll ask me, what happens to the design if I do this? Like they ask for different state designs, right? What happens if someone clicks? What happens if it's logged out? So you're trying to capture all the different state designs also on this page. Would that be correct?
Yeah, no, exactly. Just trying to get ahead of any edge cases that might come up or errors, just because it always tends to happen in tech where it's not a perfect run every time. But yeah, this is what's on the page. And again, this will also map to the Figma file. And you can see obviously like here in this file, I've tried to also show off the different statuses, but you can't define it in a nice, clean way here. And so we're trying to cover both with this together with that page, I would say.
And then if you were to click on that associated Loom video that you have for this, can I request you to click on it? Just, I want to see like, what is the information you're capturing in that Loom video for them?
Yeah, for sure. So with the Loom, this is essentially like a walkthrough of the agent. And this is like some early work where I just basically share my screen, exactly what we're doing here, and I talk through the Figma file, the intended flows and things like that. And so I find that obviously you can always meet with the engineers and run through this. And I did do this to clarify, but having a Loom is just useful because they can reference back. I've done this a couple times as well. So here's some other Looms I've made. And we had a slightly bigger team here. In the previous one, you had the feature lead and they mostly explained it to the team and did that for you. It's helpful to, even if you align one engineer in the team, they can do the rest of the aligning for you.
How many designers are there on Atlassian, roughly? Any idea?
Roughly maybe 400 or 500. I'm not too sure, but we have
definitely more than 100. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we've got a lot of designers, but we have even more engineers nowadays. And so to help design at that scale and like design well, I find it's helpful to, as long as you align some engineers, they can also align the rest of the team as well. So even though you're doing that work, you don't have to do it all the time.
And when this Loom videos, you're just walking through your files, like here I see jobs to be done. So are you explaining your thought process for the designs?
Yeah, it includes thought process. I don't know if I just mute myself. If I go to time process, you can see like jobs to be done, because it's also important to explain the why behind what we're building and the rationale. Then you can see this is like the same file, but I'm literally walking through, highlighting each state. And this helps clarify, like I talk through the spec again. I also play it through a prototype and what that means. And then actually really similarly, which is quite meta now, I'm also talking through the definition page. So I'm literally like defining it, trying to be as clear as possible in this initial, I guess you could call this team a bit more of a handover process, because I wasn't working as embedded. And so trying to do this up front saves a bit more back and forth.
Do you feel like this Loom, just creating Looms, helped you maybe cut down on maybe a few meetings with the engineering team because they could just watch your Loom video and share it internally within their team?
Yeah, for sure. It also helps with some back and forth and like different threads. I think there's always, if you're expecting a lot of feedback and conversation to happen, maybe a meeting is more appropriate. But like for things which is like, hey, here's an update on design, or I'm just sharing out a rationale and we've previously agreed on, yeah, let's build it in this way. I think Loom is super helpful. In this Loom, you can see there's like a bunch of conversation happening on the side as well of clarifying what things mean, a bit of back and forth. And so it does also help with that as well. But yeah, I definitely use Loom.
And you recorded it like first take? Because what if I am not as confident as you, Jade? And what if I need to do like 20 retakes before I get the perfect Loom recording?
Yeah, I guess in Loom you can also edit. I typically do 1 or 2 takes just because I try it, like sometimes I tend to ramble, and so Loom is helpful because I can read the transcripts and like literally delete all my ums and ahs and like pauses. So that's been super helpful actually when it needs to be polished. But usually when it's like explaining your rationale, I try to not do too many takes and try to not perfect it, because like in a meeting you would do the same thing, right? We're just like recreating that, but in a more shareable format.
And then going back to your Dev Handoff template, I'm curious to know if there's anything else in there, like any stickers or something else you've got going on there.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess even this link to the Loom, if we go to the main component, this is a Figma file that I made to help with that Dev Handoff. And at a high level, I tried to capture, so you can duplicate the file itself, and that's the basis of your file. But obviously not every project works like this. And so there are definitely components you can copy and paste. So just some basics, like things like covers you need to do for it in terms of design phase, due date, if there is a clear deadline in terms of like when it's meant to be delivered, things like that.
What are the different phases you've got for design in the cover?
Oh yeah, good question. So at Atlassian, we structure design and it's called like the Atlassian way. And so it basically breaks up the double diamond. If I just sketch here, it breaks up the double diamond as 4 phases. So you have wonder, which is what we call it internally, which is like your initial research when you start going wide, right? You're starting to wonder about the possibilities. And then you've got explore as well, where you just keep going wide. And then you have make, which is essentially when you start to build the thing. So that's usually between the explore phase and the make phase is usually when you have a lot of your back and forth also with your dev teams, other stakeholders. And then the final phase is like impact, which is, okay, cool, the feature's gone out. What can we learn? And then what next? This is set up to have a similar structure. So like wonder, explore, make, shifts, and then just some other things that I found useful, archived or to do, things like that. So yeah, that's this cover, but yeah, nothing too crazy here, I think.
The owner is the product manager or the designer working on it?
Oh, this would be the designer. So I find that, yeah, it's just like ownership of, I guess, the file, or it's really just if anyone has any questions, who can I ask about this file? So that's what I mean by owner.
Got it.
We have a about section. So I know that you can set your context in so many different ways in Figma, but I find that in order to do it in like a light way, I try to just have this about page. So just a rough, like who's involved again, like if you have any questions, you can just go to them and just ask. Stage of work. So again, you can see like the Atlassian way represented here in terms of where you are in the design process. Any useful links, and I've got a couple versions of this. So this condensed one, which is really quick spec. This more fleshed out one where you also fill in a lot of the context that you have for the projects. So like problem statements, a lot of like the first principles things, like what are the assumptions you're making going into this, things like that. And then I made this, but we don't tend to use it as much, but it's just like key pages in the file. So this is just if anyone jumps into your file and they need to go somewhere important or they want to figure out like in these pages, what are the key screens? That's what this is for. But yeah, that's like a rough about.
Oh, and then what was that good, better, best? Is that like the 3 versions of the design?
Oh, great question. Okay, so at Atlassian, I think we've tried to use this framework called good, better, best. And this is basically making sure that design as a craft is still exploring as widely as possible, despite any constraints being put on us, like timelines, scope, things like that. And good, better, best is essentially ways of framing a design in terms of the best experience for the user, a better experience and like a good experience. So obviously you want to always be aiming for best as like a designer, but under certain constraints, sometimes there is a trade-off there. And so good, better, best is a framework that helps us communicate with people about the different approaches we're taking. You can also say in this file, anything below this exploration line is a little bit messy. These are like more pages like for me to work internally and talking and going to like crits or sparring with other designers. But for example, here you can see 3 large umbrella approaches. So good, better, and the best version of the experience. And then even at a high level, like the best is the most probably simplified. And then within each approach, you have different ways that you could take it, right? So I'm saying good is you have to manually filter. Better is maybe it's like pre-filtered and we offer things differently. It's just a different framing when it comes to exploring. I think it gives you more freedom to just scrap any assumptions, and then it gives you opportunity to push back if you find, okay, actually this user experience really warrants we talk about scope a bit more. We can push back against these things. And yeah, good, better, best is a framework that I find really useful. And so trying to include it as a key page, I think, within Atlassian.
I love it.
From here, like this is like the dev template, I guess, as well. You've got an end-to-end journey map. So I actually didn't make this. Another designer, John Vaughan, made this. And he's componentized how you can set up this journey map. So
Wow.
It's pretty cool. So if I just duplicated like this instance and I actually detached it so I can move things around inside it. But it's really cool because like, for example, I can take this neutral emotion And as soon as I put it in this thinking frame, it gets updated. And so rather than having to do this manually, we're using like Figma variables and modes to like update this one step. So yeah, this is pretty cool. John's been really good at setting this up.
And what are the instructions? If you can zoom in at the top, I think there are some instructions on how to use this journey map.
Yeah, so it's copy and paste and then detach, which usually it's like not good to do. But yeah, it's then copying and pasting the emotions, and then as you change it to a different line, it will change by itself. But the idea is, I'm pretty sure, is that you can also just put, your UI or your screens here and then have the journey above.
But this is so amazing that you have this user journey template in the file. So if anyone that's coming in, they can just look at this user journey and get a very good idea about what's going on with this feature work.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of like how much we like apply or use it, obviously you try to as much as you can to do these things, but sometimes we also just tend to do user journeys also in FigJam. Like what's the best way to communicate what we need at the time? And sometimes that's a really high fidelity user journey, in which case this is like the perfect template, right? And sometimes it's just sticky notes in Figma because you're talking with the team. And so it just really depends on what you're using it for. But yeah, I can't take credit for it, but this is like super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then from here, which I guess is related to your first thing, is like the dev spec. So again, I don't always follow this per se, but you have useful components if you need to detail things out. So at a high level, you have a component spec. So this is if you're working with a bunch of new components and you want to detail everything out. You saw it on a much smaller scale with that previous file because it was just like a couple new components. But if you have a lot, this is useful. I'm pretty sure this template was also made by our design system team as well to help spec this out. And then down below, I don't use it in this form anymore because of some updates to Figma. So I realized like I use sections a lot more to structure my work rather than like an auto layout frame on top of screens, because I find that when you link to sections, it shows up better in like other contexts. So yeah, I don't exactly use this, but I still use a bunch of things here. So for example, here we've got some stickers. So for example, here it's just like a sticker I can whack on any screen. So it says copy updated, but you can swap it to design updated, implemented, just like different states for engineering. But again, actually it's interesting because sometimes I can use annotations in Figma and it still serves a similar purpose. Some other things is just the description and also like documenting trade-offs, things like that.
As I'm looking at your work, I get this feeling that when someone like you is working in a big company with 100+ designers, the requirement or the bar is not just to be a very good designer on the craft side, meaning the designs are good, but you have to have equally good organization of your files, context about your design. What do you feel about it? Because a lot of designers would be like, they look at this, they're like, I don't know how she has all this time in the world. My designs are good, but I don't really care about all this level of organization, giving context, explaining all the definitions. Here's my file, go figure it out.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think this is always a balance, right? I guess that's why like this template that we're going through will be the most fleshed out thing, because sometimes in a project, you're not going to fill out everything. Realistically, you do the best things to get the point across, and you want to strike that balance of just enough context to give the team. So this one team, for example, you can see that I did the whole Confluence page, I did the Loom, I did the spec because there wasn't as much back and forth. But back with like my embedded team, it's a lot lighter. So you can still move quick and you're enabled to still iterate quickly with the team without having to do like these heavy things. But yeah, I find that setting it up, even from a design ops perspective, is really useful because every time I want to give quick context, I don't have to recreate this. At the top of this file, we also wanted to iterate quickly. And so I've just done like a really brief, okay, here are some problems. This is our user. Here are some assumptions. Like really trying to quickly get these things through without doing it in a heavy way. So without having to make new slides to explain context, things like that. But yeah, I tend to structure my files also where the more like important pages for stakeholders are at the top. So you can see here, I use like these emojis because these are the pages that like a bunch of my team should look at.
Ah, the green dot. So it's like work is happening on.
Yeah, basically. And if I'm working on it, I'll use like the construction emoji, but everything below them is for myself. So it's a bit messier, which definitely
I'm
can see.
slowly leveling up my emoji game. My brother is a Gen Z, so he's coaching me on how to use emoji. Also, I'm understanding
good.
that when you text people, you want to use like, what is it called? Like instead of just saying HEY, you want to add 3-4 Ys to indicate like an emotion. So,
Yeah.
so I'm learning.
Hey.
I'm learning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I find emojis pretty useful as well. Just even like visually being like, oh yeah, like for myself, this is like the page that I want to use for handoff. So
Wow. This is amazing.
I could just quickly explain like the sparring thing, but I also just wanted to give context about this file or this template isn't given to us globally. Like nothing's mandated from, as Atlassian design, you must design this way. But this is something that I found useful and like I worked with my design team on. And so I guess you could call this a more of a local setup of this is how we tend to do projects and this is how we find it helpful to do things at scale. So there's no top-down mandate of every team should be positioning it this way because as like every designer works slightly differently. And so it's sort of take the bits that you find useful and yeah, you can leave the rest so you can still move quickly.
True. So design sparring. So let's just say, what is design sparring process? If you could zoom in and see what's happening here.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess design sparring, it's basically the same as design crit. We use a different word. We tend to just set context for 5 minutes. And this scale, which I find useful, which is like how ready the design is. So for example, it helps to orientate you around what type of feedback people should be giving. So at 90%, maybe you're expecting feedback about like copy, microcopy, like icons, like little nits like that. But at like maybe 30%, it's a bit like raw. I guess the design's like still being worked out. So maybe you want like overall concepts or like pattern copy. And I find that like orientating around this is helpful. And then obviously you do like a run through. So this is input as much as you want, as much or as little. You don't always need this, but if you do want particular feedback, so for example, I really want you to focus on this flow, just like a quick call out for that. And then usually sparring is done through like comments or stickies, but this is like just a personal thing, but I like to go through everything and try and rephrase it in my own words as a summary, just to figure out like, okay, what are my next steps? And so this is more of a process I find useful. So I'm like, oh, if anyone else does it, then they can use it.
The sparring board that you had in the middle, is that where people create their iterations based on your design and just put it there? Like this giant pink board here in the middle?
Yeah, that was the intention, that you could definitely like just use the space however you like. So your sparring can get quite messy and your early work can be super messy. And so you can just like copy paste it. And you don't need to polish it to get feedback. You just want to get feedback as early as you can to iterate.
And then the summary part, do you do it live during the meeting or is it something you do it later on?
I tend to do this later. I think live in the meeting, I tend to, if there's any comments, just like chatting with them and really clarifying that comment if I need clarity or just like discussion. And then it's just useful for myself to go after the meeting, when you sit down and you're like, okay, like what next? Just figuring it out. I find it useful to type it out personally.
Makes sense. Thank you so much, Jade, for coming on Deep Dive and sharing with us some advanced Figma tactics.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey folks, this is Jay. It means the world to me that you watched this video. Let me know in the comments what topics you want me to cover in the future, and I will see you in the next deep dive.